Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today we are going to be doing another episode of a series that I call Games I've Wanted to Play. Now this was a series I launched back in 2022 and I did a couple of videos including one on Dino Crisis, Parasite Eve and Square Enix's The Bouncer. The premise is quite simple. We take a look through the treasure chest that is video games history and we pick out and play through a game that I've always wanted to play. Now this could be a game that I've maybe heard of as a child that it's never got round to pick it up or buying it, or maybe something a bit more recent that I've heard of either through a friend or seeing a retrospective on it that's piqued my interest. But what we do is we take these games and we play through them. I'll give you my sort of expectations of the game, I'll tell you a little bit about it, I'll play through the first 30 minutes and give my initial thoughts on it before playing through the rest of the game and giving a more overall conclusion towards the end. So let's delve into today's game. Today our game of choice is Syphon Filter, a third-person stealth action game released in 1999 for the Sony PlayStation. It was developed by Eidetic, who would later go on to become Ben Studio, the team behind Days Gone. It tells the story of Gabe Logan, a special agent charged with investigating a number of bioterror events in various parts of the world. These have been orchestrated by the terrorist group Black Button, led by Eric Romer. The game kicks off just after Romer has set loose a number of his group in Washington DC. Gabe must make his way through parts of the city, including the streets, the subways, and also the Memorial Park, tagging and aiding with the defusal of a number of bombs, taking down the terrorists, and also eventually some big members of Romer's organisation. As the story goes on, you discover that Black Button has taken control of a virus called the Syphon Filter. The previous outbreaks were experimental usages of it. This particular virus is quite scary because it's capable of being reprogrammed to target any particular demographic in the world. So if you take a person and break down certain aspects of them, their race, their hair colour, gender, you can reprogram this virus to target any particular aspect of it. So getting it back, getting it under control, quite an important thing. Now, interestingly, this game was almost cancelled a number of times, citing reasons such as lack of inspiration and also the inexperience of the development staff within the studio. It did get released to widespread acclaim, cementing its place as one of the PSOne's must-play titles. It also came in the wake of what you'd probably say is the birth of the stealth action genre. Stealth games weren't really a major thing until about 1998 with the release of Metal Gear Solid, Thief and Tenchu. Syphon Filter kind of takes some of those aspects of stealth and puts it in the game as well, kind of continuing that on. So let's move on to what my expectations are of this game. So, what do I expect from Syphon Filter? Now, this is quite interesting because this is technically a game I have played before when I was a lot younger. I have very fond memories of going to my uncle's house when I was very young. My two cousins there, they had a PlayStation and Syphon Filter was one of the games they had. In particular, I remember the museum level where you have to use stealth for sort of the first third of it. You can't get spotted, otherwise it's an instant fail. And I remember going over that again and again and again, perfecting it until we could get through it. I remember having so much fun with it. Now, the rest of the game, kind of a little bit hazy to me. Don't quite remember other aspects of it. I remember it being good. I remember getting it for myself, but never completed it. And then as time went on, it always just became a fond memory and a game that I always wanted to come back to and actually finish. Now, as mentioned, this game released in the wake of the stealth action genre kind of becoming more of a thing. So I'm expecting it to lean into that. As I mentioned, the museum level has you using stealth, and if you get spotted, you fail. I'm kind of expecting maybe a couple more levels like that. I'm expecting it to be quite heavy on punishing you should you be spotted by enemies. But I'm expecting it to be a little bit cumbersome with some of the stealth as well, because we are talking sort of, I guess, 1999 mid to late PS1 era. This was also released at a time when video games were becoming a little bit more cinematic. I'm expecting to see, well, here, a fair amount of voice acting, some high impact cinematics for a game of the time. Gameplay wise, maybe somewhat tanky controls. I can't quite remember how this played myself, but I'm expecting it to be a little bit awkward because, you know, games now, so much more responsive, so much more fluid, so much more standardised in how they control. and because the stealth action genre was relatively new at the time and developers were finding their feet, I'm expecting it to maybe feel a little bit awkward, a little bit tanky in places. Difficulty-wise, I can remember that museum level being quite difficult. I'm expecting very similar things with other levels requiring stealth. I'm also vaguely remembering some escort quests, or area parts where you have to protect your sort of NPCs from enemies. I'm expecting them to be very awkward with quite limited AI for anyone you are escorting, so maybe a little bit of difficulty there. I'm also thinking there might be a few time sections with fairly tight deadlines, because I know back in the sort of PlayStation era, and maybe this is, my memory being a bit hazy, but I remember anything with a deadline back then being very, very tight. So, let's get on to the first 30 minutes and see how I got on. So, the first 30 minutes of the game, it does offer tutorial videos, but I decided to just dive straight in. Admittedly, I've never really been great at watching videos and replicating it. I've always been more practical, hands-on. So a good tutorial mission suits me fine, but sitting there watching a video and repeating it, nah, not my kind of thing. So the first 30 minutes of the game pretty much covered the opening mission. I got myself used to the controls, didn't really find it too tough. It allowed me to get used to how to line up shots, lean around corners, move Gabe about, just that kind of thing. Like I say, I didn't find it too awkward, and that opening 30 minutes allowed me to get used to how the game handles. The game takes advantage of Sony's DualShock controller, which meant you do get some degree of analog movement in there. Unfortunately, due to it not being standardised at the time, the right analog stick did absolutely nothing in terms of moving the camera. That did not stop me from trying to use it all the time. If you recorded myself playing the game, you would see me every time I turn a corner trying to move the right analog stick to move the camera in time, which I knew was fruitless, but it's so instinctual to me. The default controls put square on shoot, with aiming on your shoulder buttons. Now, aiming on shoulder buttons, kind of a standardised thing nowadays. Shooting on square, not so much anymore. So that took a little bit of adjusting to. I'm so used to using the shoulder buttons to shoot in modern games, but the controls are remappable, so you can theoretically change them to whatever you do actually desire. Gabe's movement itself was a lot smoother than I expected. Maybe that was thanks to the analog movement. If I had resorted to D-pad only, it could have been a different story, but I didn't have any difficulties with the first half hour or so of the game. There's an auto-aim lock-on for, just being out in the open and fighting enemies. Sometimes it would result in a weird twisting of Gabe's body. Like, say there's an enemy positioned behind me, I'm facing forward, you hit auto-aim and Gabe would just sort of go like that really awkwardly. But, yeah, Signal at times are not the worst visual thing ever. Although sometimes it did make me think, am I actually aiming at and hitting those enemies? Changing your weapons, going through the inventory was absolutely fine. There's a few options there for swapping your weapons. A single press of select changes them one by one. You can hold it down to go through sort of in-game real, like you scroll through the L2, R2 to change weapons. Or you can go into the pause menu and change it, which is quite handy if you're in a situation where you need to change it quickly and safely rather than scrolling through. The game doesn't pause while you open up the scroll menu like, again, modern games will do, so you can get caught out by that. I know I did a number of times. The first mission wasn't overly tough like I thought it might be. Again, this is going back to my memories of the game. I remember having the demo as well as the main game. The demo felt a little bit harder. The main game, being younger, I was susceptible to using cheat codes and such at the time, and I kind of whisked forward to that museum level. There's a few varied objectives on there: tagging bombs for NPCs to defuse, tracking down a particular enemy, finding your way around. Admittedly, maybe a little bit tricky to find your way around due to the way the map layout was, but I didn't have too many problems with that first mission. So, first 30 minutes done, what about the rest of the game? So the second mission, they introduces climbing a little bit to the game. Now I found this to be a little bit cumbersome. Lining Gabe up to the edges in the right position to make a climb could be quite awkward. There was one particular mission when you're trying to break out of a subway that's on fire, where you've got to climb this pipe hanging over you, and lining him up on a narrow platform could be quite difficult because you press forward and he'd maybe go a little bit too fast for it. It wasn't too bad, but a little bit awkward, maybe. As the game went on, I really enjoyed the globetrotting aspect of it. It's broken down into several locations, each location having about 3 to 4 levels within it. This is something I do miss in modern titles. I think having larger open worlds is absolutely incredible, and I love that. I love being able to traverse an entire solid map, one place to the other, seeing what's within it. But I also really like it when a game would put you in one country for one mission, another country for the next mission, and it was always kind of fun seeing developers mix it up with these environments, how they'd, change the look of the enemies you'd be fighting, how they tweak the audio to fit where you were, the different visuals. I just thought that was really, really neat, and that's something maybe I'll talk about when I come to a game like Tomb Raider as well, because it was a big thing there that I really liked. As far as difficulty goes, a lot of the game's difficulty came from enemy placement. Sometimes enemies would just appear behind you, and I felt that, if you knew where the enemies were going to come from, you were pretty much fine for it. The trick is expecting it whenever you turn a corner. So every time you turn a corner, no matter where you are, either expect an enemy to come from behind you, or expect them to be round the corner. So, leaning into the stealth aspect of the game, you'll find yourself going quite slowly, lining yourself up to a wall, leaning around the wall, shooting, lining up the headshots. And I found that really fun, actually. It was always quite satisfying to lean around the corner, seeing the guards completely oblivious to you, line up the headshots in the first person aiming, take them out before they could see you, and move on. Some of the game's difficulty as well, it goes back to what I expected, escort quests. Now, there's not too many in there. There's one mission in a park where you have the bombs you've got to tag. A guy will come over and start defusing it, and then you'll be attacked by enemies. Because of getting used to the aiming and the fact that the NPCs you're escorting don't really tend to do much, it could be a little bit difficult to do that. There's also one mission later on in the game where you've got to escort a guy out with some catacombs. He's unarmed, but he leads you, and then, of course, he runs into the enemies first. Again, it's about knowing where the enemies are going to be, making sure you're quick enough to aim and take them out, but it is awkward, but I think some of the checkpoints were spaced quite evenly apart, so it wasn't the worst thing ever. There is also a few particular time sequences, again going back to what I said of my expectations really, that have really tight deadlines. This sort of became more evident towards the end of the game, maybe where you would expect it to become a little bit more difficult. Also, maybe going back to my initial 30 minutes, sometimes knowing exactly where you needed to go was quite tricky. It could be quite easy to get lost. Gameplay wise, stealth aspects, when you got used to it, really, really fun. Like I mentioned, always super satisfying to sneak in, line up your headshots, take down the enemy before they saw me, and move onwards. Some of the forced stealth elements, like the museum level, were tough but very fair. There was also another stealth sequence later on where you didn't fail the mission if you got spotted, but it did make things 10 times harder. Maybe like you would expect it to. It was shown, the game was kind of showing you that you're meant to play it in this particular way. You don't fail if you don't play it like that, but it is going to get harder to you, as you might expect it to. Voice acting throughout the game, absolutely fine. I don't think it was on the level of, say, Metal Gear Solid, but I think that is a very special case for back in the late 90s, and it was handled very well considering the era it came out in. I think the game did a great job of blending its own gameplay and action with its cinematic side. Obviously, Metal Gear Solid is an obvious comparison, but it felt like a completely different game. And moving on to sort of some of the last aspects of it, there were a few boss fights scattered in between. They weren't especially tough, but they were varied and fun. I quite enjoyed the one sort of at the end of the Washington levels where you've got a guy with a flamethrower and you've got to line up the shots to his backpack to take him out and stay well hidden. There's also your typical kind of like big vehicle fight where you're fighting in a helicopter, which I thought was really cool. I think for me, playing through it, I played through it on an emulator, just, to be completely open with that. So some of the modern conveniences that allowed were appreciated. Save states, your biggest one, especially when some of the checkpoints were further apart. I think if you're going to play this completely purely, you probably wouldn't have too much of a difficult time with it. But if you were concerned, and maybe you're playing on one platform or an emulator, you might appreciate the save states. I know these games have released on the PS5 now, so you've got save states and I think a rewind function there, which might come in handy for you if you want to make use of it. Like I mentioned, there is also the possibility in the game to fail missions for not completing an objective and then going to where the mission end will trigger. This is something quite amusing about games around this time that give you a number of objectives and set you out on the mission. I know when I played through GoldenEye, it popped up a couple of times. So throughout the game, had a really, really good time with it. So let's get on to what my final conclusions are. So now that I've finished the game, what are my conclusions for it? Well, I think the game's absolutely worth playing. I really enjoyed my time with it. I was a bit worried going into it, thinking it might not live up to the memories I had of it, but it surpassed them. As I played through more levels, as I got more used to the gameplay, I really, really enjoyed it. I keep going back to, you know, the sort of stealth parts of it, line-up shots, sneaking around, not being spotted by enemies, enjoying that challenge of it. It was very satisfying to play. Maybe for some people the controls might not have aged super well, but I think that's always going to be a problem when you go back to that sort of PlayStation era as such. And you can remap things if you want to, something more suited to your tastes. I didn't find the default controls too bad. I did miss being able to control the camera on the right analog stick, but it wasn't really a big thing at the time, so I'm not going to dock at any points for that. I think the game had some frustrations in there. Maybe some of the stealth, forced stealth where you failed for being spotted were a little bit difficult, but you learn every time you failed, so it wasn't the worst thing in the world. The escort stuff where you've got to protect NPCs, that's always kind of been a problem in games, and I think it will be for a long time going forward. Maybe that's just down to learning where the enemies are going to come from and getting better at that manual aiming. When it first popped up in the park, I wasn't used to the manual aiming, so I found it more difficult. When I was escorting the guy through the catacombs and knew where the enemies were going to come from, I didn't find it too bad, although the guy running ahead all the time and being the first to get shot was quite irritating. As mentioned though, people might want to rely on save states or rewind if you're playing it on the PS5 version or an emulator. I don't think the checkpoints were too far apart for them to cause too much difficulty if you want to do a pure run of it. And finally, sort of maybe thinking about the franchise as a whole, it would be awesome to see a remake of this. And I know this is probably something that maybe pops up a lot with these kind of videos because so many of these games we'd love to see re-released. But I think you could do a lot with Syphon Filter on modern technology. I think it's a franchise with some legs. You've got a decent plot here. You've got a character people can latch on to. You could really, enhance the graphics, enhance the gameplay, lean more into the stealth and gadget side of things. You could do something really special here. So that's pretty much my thoughts on it. I absolutely loved my time with it. I think it was really fun to revisit it. It is, like I said, this is a game from my childhood that I haven't played for so many years. I've always wanted to complete it, and I'm really glad I did, and I will definitely be going on to play Syphon Filter 2 and 3 as time goes on. So with all of that said, I'd like to thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this. If you did enjoy this video, please do leave a like and a comment. Be sure to let me know if you played Syphon Filter in the past and your thoughts on the game or series, or, any other retro games that you enjoyed and you'd maybe like to see me play. I'm hoping to do these videos on a more regular basis going forward. This is a series I really, really wanted to do more of last year, but never really found the time to do. And now I feel like I'm in a place where I can do more of them. I've got a number of games lined up to do it, but like I said, do suggest your own in the comments, and maybe we'll look at trying them out. As I said, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I do really appreciate it. Please, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel for more, and I hope to see you all again very soon. Goodbye.